Back in the early 1930s, Paramount Pictures offered Broadway comedian, actress, and sex symbol Mae West a movie contract. She came to Hollywood and then moved into an apartment building that was built and owned by Paramount Pictures just 6 blocks west of the studio here. This historic apartment building is located in the Handcock Park neighborhood of the city, and I thought I would just take a drive over from the studio and show you just how close it is and tell you a little bit about its history. This street is the famous Melrose Avenue, and just a block to the left are the even more famous entrance gates to Paramount Studios that we've all seen in so many movies over the years. So I'm heading west now on Melrose Avenue, and just 6 short blocks up ahead is the famous Vine Street. And this is where Vine Street changes its name to Rossmore Avenue. We're going to make a left on Rossmore Avenue, but if we made a right-hand turn and headed north, we'd come to the intersection of Hollywood and Vine in about a mile or two. I'm mentioning this to give you an idea of just how close all of these famous and historic locations are to one another. This is still a very upscale neighborhood here in Los Angeles, and one of the few where you can still find many vintage homes and condos and apartment buildings from those glamorous Hollywood days gone by. Mae West's former apartment building is called the Ravenswood, and it's here on the left-hand side. Hi everybody, Steve here in Hollywood, California, standing in front of the Ravenswood apartment buildings. The famous historic apartment buildings that were built in 1930 by Paramount Studios, and where many, if not all, of the Paramount Studio stars once called home, or at least used as a place to come and take a break from filming. The most famous resident was probably Mae West, who lived here for 50 years. She lived here from 1930 to 1980 when she died. This is the apartment building where she was still living when she died in 1980. It's really cool. It's an historic landmark now, and it really looks pretty much, at least from the outside, just the way it must have looked when she first moved in nearly 100 years ago. So this building is very historic, at least by Los Angeles standards. Most of our older architecturally significant buildings are just torn down. We really have never valued architecture here or history. Well, I shouldn't say. I think we do value architecture, but we don't really value history very much. And many of our most treasured landmarks have been just bulldozed, so someone can make a lot more money. Now it's a pretty busy street. Look at this small parking garage here. This was built by Paramount Studios back in 1930. I presume it was built for the stars, so they would have a place to live nearby the studios, or maybe a place to, to take a break from filming. It's just down the street. You could walk just a few blocks away. Somehow I'm guessing that Mae West never walked to work, but then again, you never know. See if I can peek inside here. Well, it looks pretty original, doesn't it? Elevators, chandelier. Mailboxes. Okay, let's see. Ravenswood Apartments, Art Deco style. Architect Max Maltzman, built 1930, declared 2003 Historic Cultural Monument. Number 768, City of Los Angeles, Cultural Heritage Commission. And here's the news of the day. I wonder what the news was back in 1930 when this apartment building was built. Okay, so I'm going to head across the street and see if I can get a better vantage point to show you the building. Up close you don't really get to see much. Well, here's a nice sign. Let me show you this. Ravenswood. I love that sign. And it looks like it was probably lit up at one time with neon. I don't think it still is. It's hard to tell. from this distance. And I apologize that the cars in the background are just so loud. It's a very busy street, but unfortunately I've discovered that my new camera dramatically amplifies any background noise. It also has no stabilization, so even the slightest movement makes it look like you're filming during a violent earthquake. Ironically, this camera is advertised as the perfect vlogging camera. What they don't tell you is that it doesn't really work as a vlogging camera unless you also buy the additional gimbal attachment for an extra $150 to help remove all of the shaking. And again, ironically, the reason I spent so much money to purchase this new camera was to help improve the quality of the audio on my videos. Not only did the quality of the audio get worse, but the camera introduced a new problem of shaking that I never had before with my iPhone camera. So if you happen to be thinking about buying a new vlogging camera, I just wanted to give you a heads up. So I guess I'll be going back to using my iPhone. I found a new external microphone attachment for my iPhone, so we'll see how that works out. While doing a little research for this video before coming here today, I read that Mae West back in the day had a black or African-American boyfriend. In fact, he was a very famous boxer. And there was still a lot of prejudice and a lot of segregation back then. And the management of the building would not let him in to visit her in her apartment building. So she bought the building so she could change the rules and he could visit whenever he wanted to. That's pretty cool, isn't it? She was a pretty gutsy lady. The name of the boxer was William Gorilla Jones. I guess he was pretty popular back at that time. I've never heard of him, have you? For so many reasons, West was considered to be one of the most controversial movie stars of her day. But she once said, "I believe in censorship. I made a fortune out of it." And she sure did, becoming the master of the double entendre. In 1932, she made her first film for Paramount Studios, and it was titled Night After Night. Her co-star was George Raft, who suggested her for the role, and one of her most famous movie lines came from this film. In one of the funniest and most memorable scenes, a hat check girl says to her, "Goodness, what beautiful diamonds." West replies, "Goodness had nothing to do with it, dearie." The movie was an instant hit, and so was Bad Girl Mae West. A year later, in 1933, she appeared in the movie She Done Him Wrong with Cary Grant, and the film was nominated for an Academy Award for Best Picture, and it was so successful that it saved Paramount Pictures from bankruptcy. In that same year, she had the biggest hit of her career with the movie I'm No Angel, also starring Cary Grant. This was during the Great Depression, and West was one of the biggest box office draws in the U.S. And by 1935, she had become the highest paid woman in the U.S. She was also the second highest paid person in the U.S. after William Randolph Hearst. This was a time in American history when women were still considered to be second-class citizens. But Mae West broke all of the rules, and as a result became a pop cultural icon and a legend in her own time. And she did it all while living here for 5 decades in her luxury penthouse apartment at the now historic Ravenswood. In 1980, she had a stroke while getting out of bed, which resulted in a terrible fall. She died on November 22, 1980, at the age of 87, and was interred at Cypress Hills Abbey near her parents and other family members in Brooklyn, New York, the city where she was born. She's buried in New York, and I definitely would love to visit her gravesite one day, assuming it's open to the public. I'm not really sure if it is or not. In many ways, she's been forgotten over the years. So she was living here at the same time when I was living here in Hollywood, and maybe that's why I'm so familiar with her. I mean, growing up, I watched Mae West movies all the time, and everyone did, and she was very popular, even in the 1960s and 70s and until her death. So at the time, she lived here. I did drive by a couple of times, and I knew she lived here. This was back in, mid-1970s and until 1980, until she died. But this is the first time I've actually come and filmed. Of course, we didn't have YouTube back then to share these videos with everyone. So do you have a favorite Mae West quote? Here are some of my favorites. "When I'm good, but when I'm bad, I'm better. It's not the men in my life that count, it's the life in my men. I generally avoid temptation unless I can't resist it. And of course, you only live once, but if you do it right, once is enough." That's a pretty good motto to live by, don't you think? And this week I'd like to give a shout out and a very big thank you to my newest PayPal supporter who says he'd prefer to remain anonymous. So I won't mention your name, but I'm sure you know who you are. But since you've made the biggest donation to my channel so far, I couldn't let that go without at least saying thank you, even if it's just anonymously. So until our next trip to the past together, thanks for sharing the memories, everyone.